So hi everybody. My study is called L2 Listeners Comprehension of Accented Speech in Quiet and Noisy Environments. And oh, so background information on this study is that there are several studies which look at how people understand and perceive accents in noise. And background noise is a very important and useful technique that you can use to notice how people perceive these accents. And this is because it exacerbates your understanding or misunderstanding of a certain accent condition. So this study is based off of mostly Bent and Holt 2018, and they did a study which looked at L1 American English speakers comprehension of 3 different accent conditions in varying degrees of noise. So in the quiet condition, they found that they had an easy time understanding all of them, but then when background noise was added, even Americans had a harder time understanding British accents. So background noise can have a huge effect and exacerbate what we believe is a familiarity with an accent. So if you are familiar with an accent, you're more likely to understand it even in noise. So even if you know that you can understand British English, it may change depending on how noisy your background is. And this is really important because the world we live in is generally really noisy. So this applies to any public space, really. So this study decided to focus on second language speakers because there's not a lot of research that looks into that. So the existing research in how second language speakers perceive accents in and comprehend accents in their second language seems to suggest that there's still this familiarity aspect to it. So what we did in this study was we recruited first we hold on, sorry, wait. So that's the research question, is how do bilingual listeners who are L2 English speakers process and understand and perceive different accents of English because English is their second language. So first we started by creating stimuli. So we made 120 English sentences, and we chose 4 accent conditions for this experiment. The accent conditions were unmarked American, which is, I guess, what I speak. I also chose a Southern accent because I thought it would be really interesting to see a regional American accent that maybe isn't as heard in Europe as an accent condition for this kind of a study. We chose a Dutch accent, and we recruited people from the Netherlands. So this is the same accent as the people who are doing the experiment. And we chose a Chinese accent, which is supposed to be very different from what the Dutch people would be used to hearing in English. So we programmed an experiment on LabVance where we had all of these sentences recorded with 4 different speakers. And we created a study where it just in random order would play the sentences, and we would use background noise on half of them. So there was an equal number of sentences with and without background noise in every condition. And the background noise was babble, and we used the 0 decibel SNR, which means that like the babble is like proportionate to the background noise roughly equally. So we also included some screening questions. One thing that I wanted to make sure was that participants hadn't lived in the United States, so that we could see if they had an easier time listening to their own accent, that being the Dutch accented English or an American accent. And this is under the assumption that people in Europe are probably going to be exposed to more accented English from the European continent, so as opposed to an American accent. And furthermore, choosing the regional American accent is also part of this, so that they would to see whether or not a regional accent but a native speaker of English would give a sort of effect in comprehension. So even though the Southerner might be a native English speaker, would the Dutch English bilinguals be able to understand it at the same capacity? So we programmed this through LabVance. We had so we had the screening questions, we had the transcription task, Then we asked them to identify where they thought the speakers were from. And then we had them take a Lextail English test, so that just to make sure that their English was as well as was well enough to do the experiment. We first recruited participants through just connections that we had to the Netherlands, but that seemed very, very slow, and we did not get a lot of participants that way. So we found this service called Prolific, which is really great. And it's sort of like social media, but for social science researchers. So you put up a study, you have a link to the software that runs the study, and you basically post it to the public. You say, this is how much we'll pay you per hour. This is how long it's supposed to take. This is who we're looking for. And you open up the study, you publish it on Prolific, and then within like less than a day, you can have all of the participants that you need. Now, I wasn't able to do that per se because there were a lot of different factors that I was looking at in recruiting. So if you're just trying to conduct a survey, it's way easier. But if you're trying to do a social science experiment or like a cognitive experiment where you need several different factors to be true in order to analyze and interpret your data, that's different. So I had the goal of recruiting 40 participants. I only got to 21 by the time that I was able to analyze my data and make my poster. Today, I have 38. So I only need 2 more, and I'll be able to analyze my data over the summer. The plan is with this more statistical power, I might be able to publish it. So, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'll talk more about the data later. So all of the participants are Dutch English bilinguals. They're between the ages of 18 and 45. They've never lived in the United States or spent time in the United States greater than 2 months, and they needed to pass the Lextail English task. So for the procedure, what we did was we recruited online, and this sent them a link to the study, and they would go through the study and do the screening questions. They had to wear headphones, so they had to pass this headphone test. And then they would do transcription for 120 sentences. Half of the sentences were in background noise, and this is proportional to all of the accent conditions. Then after completing the experiment, they were asked, or after completing the transcription task, they were asked to identify where they thought each of the accents were from. And so they listened to the accent again, and they said, what do you think their native country is? And what do you think their native language is? And so for the data processing, we basically graded all of the sentences individually and looked for specific keywords because some people make typos. So you can't just grade people if they, accidentally forget to say the or a or something like that. So we looked for specific keywords in every sentence and saw whether or not they were able to accurately identify the right words in the sentence. So there were only 3 to 5 critical words in every sentence. So then we took the score for all of the sentences. Then we categorized them based on the accent and the noise condition. Then we averaged them. And then we did this for every participant and then compared the averages against each other. So this way we could see the 4 accent conditions, both like in each accent condition having quiet and noise. And this was graded out of 100. So the results are very interesting and highly unexpected. So there was not really a significant difference between there was no significant difference between the Southern and the unmarked American accents. There was a significant difference between the Dutch accented English and the American accents, but they still scored generally pretty well on the Dutch accent condition. However, the Chinese accent was relatively low compared to the rest of the accent conditions in silent, but in noise, we saw something very unexpected, which was that the American accents both showed high levels of comprehension, and that the Chinese and the Dutch accents showed lower levels of comprehension, with the Dutch accent showing the largest drop in comprehension. So this is very unlike my predicted results. So also, my presentation isn't loading the key. So just to be clear, so this would be, I believe, the Chinese accent in noise. the Chinese accent in silent, the Dutch accent in noise, the Dutch accent in silent, the Southern accent in silent, no, in noise, the Southern accent in silent, the American accent in noise, and the American accent in silent. So I'm sorry that that's not loading on my presentation. So there's also some really interesting results for the perception of the accents. So for the American accents, the Southern accent was generally understood to be a native English speaker by everybody. Almost all, except for one participant, thought that they were from the United States. One of them thought that they were from Australia. For the unmarked American accent, most people thought that they were American, but one person thought that this speaker was actually Dutch, which is very interesting. For the Chinese accent, I'm sorry about that. So for the Chinese accent, most people generally guessed that this person was from China, or I think that it says like Taiwan or Thailand. So generally East Asia, but we had some Italy and Poland, which was interesting. And even a few people thinking that this person was from the US or the UK. So I don't really know what to make of that. The most interesting results were that only 1 out of 3 of the participants were able to guess that the Dutch speaker was actually Dutch. More people thought that they were a native English speaker, either from the UK, the United States, or Australia. And there were a lot of people who also thought that the speaker could have been German. For the native language, most people again accurately identified that for the Chinese, that at least over 50% that they spoke some variety of Chinese. That being Chinese, I think that they meant Mandarin and Cantonese. There's also other languages that I felt that some people may have been guessing the accent because they didn't know. But then in the Dutch, we also see that 43% of the participants thought that their native language was English, and that 33% thought that they were Dutch. So more people, again, thought that the Dutch accent was a native English speaker than a native Dutch speaker. And everybody guessed that the Southerner was a native English speaker. And again, I believe that the same person who thought that the American accent was from the Netherlands thought that their native language was Dutch. So what do we make of these results? So, oh, this is summarizing the results. Sorry. So the 33% of participants correctly identified the Dutch speaker. Most people, or 43% of the participants thought that the Dutch speaker was an English L1 speaker. Majority of participants identified the Chinese speaker as a speaker of a Chinese variety. And most people were able to accurately identify that the Americans were American English native speakers. These findings are very unexpected, and I think that it would be unwise for me to jump to any strong conclusions other than in this study, we don't see the ISI effect, which means that so this is sort of hard to describe. So you are able to perceive people who speak like you more accurately. I believe that that's the best way to describe that. And so there's no ISI effect in the Dutch speakers, and the regional versus sort of unmarked American accents showed no strong effects. And so I think that I would like to keep analyzing the data to see if this is going to be true for the remainder of my participants. And I would like to honestly do more research on this topic, because I think that it would be unwise to draw any conclusions from this. And I think that it would be a great opportunity to be critical of my own study. For example, in my study, I think that I didn't have entire creative control over the stimuli, because I was borrowing some stimuli from people in my lab who did a similar study. So if I were to do this again, I would want to start from scratch, write all of the sentences, record all of the new recordings, test for auditory anomalies, and reprogram the experiment just to make sure that this is as it is. So that's it. So these are my references, and I'd like to thank Dr. Van Hel. Jeanette is awesome. I'd love to thank you, Shuang Liu, and I don't think I wrote her in here, but Holly Zarchuk, who are students graduate students in the Bilingual Development Lab. They're amazing. They helped me out a lot with this study. And everybody at the Center for Language Science, you guys are amazing. This was really cool and a really exciting opportunity. So thank you very much.